Yeah. So tonight we're looking at the final of our origin stories. So we're focusing on Noah and his relationship to Jesus and the gospel message. Um, and I guess a fair question to start with is perhaps, aren't we getting a bit ahead of ourselves here? We've been spending the last few weeks looking at these first 11 chapters from Genesis, and Jesus isn't going to be born for another 2,000 years. So why are we looking for him in this? Well, I think as we're wrapping up this series, it's good to look forward to what's this the origin what these origin stories of. Um, if you're a fan of the Bible Project videos, you've probably heard this phrase that they say that the whole of the Bible is one unified story that leads to Jesus. And another thing that's said of the Bible is it's perhaps the first hyperlinked book. There's all these stories in the Old Testament and then stories in the New Testament, and so many connections between them, which can sometimes be somewhat hidden. And I think there's biblical precedent for looking for Jesus in the Old Testament as well. Towards the start of Jesus's ministry in John 5, he's talking to the Pharisees, and he tells them that you study the scriptures diligently because you think that in them you have eternal life. These are the very scriptures that testify about me, yet you refuse to come to me to have life. Which scriptures is he talking about here? The New Testament hasn't even been written yet, so clearly he's talking here about the Old Testament. And then again, we see towards the end of Jesus' ministry, this is on the road to Emmaus. This is post Jesus' resurrection, when he's talking to the disciples that don't even recognize him. And he tells them that beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all of the scriptures concerning himself. So yeah, I think there's biblical precedent for looking at the Old Testament and finding how that relates forward to Jesus. And I think on a more practical level, perhaps we can also see that what do we get from looking for Jesus in the Old Testament? Well, I like to use the analogy of like seasoning your food. I think the gospel messages you can get by just reading those. They're like the nutrients, that your beef, your salad, or whatever. But actually, by adding some salt, adding some seasoning to that, you enhance the flavors. You draw out different flavors that are perhaps hard to notice or are hidden in the gospel messages itself. So I think it's a useful way to draw out different themes and perhaps gain new insights. So okay, hopefully we're all sort of motivated in why are we even looking for Jesus in the first place in this story of Noah. So let's get stuck into to Noah itself. So in previous sessions we've read out the whole passage, but I think since Noah's story is spread over 4 chapters, I'm going to try and sort of summarize slightly and fit it all onto this one slide. And I think, as an aside, that actually, since we are trying to look for parallels between two different stories, that actually this summarization approach is quite helpful in finding what's the sort of high level pictures that we should be getting from this. So we start the story of Noah learning about the setting that it's placed in. So we read in Genesis 6 that the Lord observed the extent of human wickedness on the earth. He saw that everything they thought or imagined was consistently and totally evil. Now the God saw that the earth had become corrupt and was filled with violence. So we're painted a pretty bleak picture here, right? We're starting with what's clearly a broken world that's filled with sin, filled with violence. Next, we're introduced to the main character. So who was Noah? Well, we read that Noah's a man that he found favor with the Lord. He's described as a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. Interestingly, the King James version translates this phrase "blameless among the people of his time" as perfect in his generations. Which might lead you to question, well, what does it mean for a man to be perfect? But like I said, for now we're starting zoomed out, big picture. So we're going to take it as written, and we're going to say that the next point in this summary is that a perfect man arrives. So what happens next? Well, God speaks to Noah. He says that he's going to put an end to all people. The earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth. So make yourself an ark of cypress. Everything on earth will perish, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark. So we see here that God's got a plan. The world is broken, but God's got a plan to use this man to make changes. And then we read that Noah does everything that God commands him. So we see that the man obeys God. Next, we read that rain falls on the earth for 40 days and for 40 nights. Every living thing that moves on the land perishes, birds, livestock, and wild animals, all the creatures that swam over the earth, and all mankind. So, this God's plan is starting to come into effect, and to be honest, it's kind of looking bleak, right? It looks like death is currently winning the day, but God doesn't leave it there. He steps in. So we read in Genesis 8 that God remembers Noah, all the wild animals, and the livestock that were with him in the ark, and he sent a wind over the earth, and the waters receded. So we see here, that God's intervening in this situation. He's not leaving Noah where he is. It then carrying on, we see that God speaks to Noah, and he tells him to come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and their wives, bring out every kind of living creature that is with you. So we see here that through Noah, others are saved as well. So his children, his wife, and the animals as well. And I think perhaps there's something in the picture of all these different animals coming from different places, and that resonates with Jesus as well. That people from all over the world can come to him and be saved. Then we read that God blesses Noah and his sons. He tells them to be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. So we see the conclusion here, once he's come off the ark, is really like a repeat from what we read in Genesis 1. We're seeing this promise, this covenant relationship, and also God blessing them, and the same command that we read in Genesis 1 being repeated. So really, what we're seeing here is that a brand new creation is starting. And hopefully it's not too much of a leap to see that this summary applies to Jesus's life as well. We see throughout the whole of the Old Testament the ways in which mankind is sinful and broken. Jesus that then arrives, and God has a plan to use Jesus to fix the world. Jesus obeys God even to the point of dying on the cross. At that point, death appears to be victorious, but God intervenes, raising him to life after 3 days, and others are saved through that man's actions, and a new creation can begin. So okay, we've kind of seen a summary of Noah's story, but what have we actually learned? What's the seasoning that we're putting onto the gospel message through Noah? I think there's a few things that we can take from this. I think perhaps one of the first things that stands out to me is that we're kind of setting a precedent here that actually one person, when partnering with God, is able to save all of creation. And we see this over and over in the Old Testament, that God chooses one man. So later on we see Abraham, we see Moses. Interestingly, this is perhaps the first man that God chooses. This is right at the start of the Bible in Genesis and 6. So this is the first person that God chooses to partner with. And already with that very first person, we're seeing this pattern being formed, right? Of using this one man to save creation. And so we're seeing this pattern which foreshadows Jesus is coming. I think there's an encouragement in that for us as well, that looking at, if we just read the gospel message in itself, it's easy to assume that only Jesus is capable of this much impact. And obviously it's true that Jesus is the Son of God. He is he is different to us as mankind, but actually God still wants to partner with us. He wants to be able to use us too. And I think part of that is a challenge as well, that we should seek out what God's doing in our lives and partner with him, and not to be overwhelmed by the size of our task, because actually our lives can have a real impact. I think the next thing that perhaps we're sort of drawing out through this story of Noah is that creation really does need a complete reboot. It's not we're seeing here a complete wiping of the slate, that the earth is completely flooded, all people are wiped out, and so sin is really a bigger problem than perhaps we recognize. And again, I think perhaps that's something that is present in the gospel stories, but actually is maybe clearer in this analogy from Noah's story, because we really do see this wiping away, and actually we're seeing effectively like an uncreation in the sort of Hebrew and Israelite imagination. That the chaotic water is like water is a symbol of chaos. So if we look back at Genesis 1, we see that we start with God's spirit is like hovering over this sphere of water, and God can then separate the land from the water to bring about order and to bring about new life. And so we're seeing this imagery that water is equivalent to chaos, but God doesn't leave it there. He can he uses that as a point of transition. And so I think that's quite an encouragement for us as well, that actually if in our lives we're feeling uncertain, we're in a time of chaos, maybe we're changing jobs or we're moving house, that actually God doesn't leave us there. God uses that as a transition mechanism, because I think moving from one sort of point of order to another without that uncertainty in the middle is quite difficult. And I think that's being shown here, that God uses this chaos as a way of rebooting creation, and he can use it in our lives as well to reboot sort of our lives. So I think that we can dig a little deeper into this story, though. I alluded to earlier in our summary that is Noah really a direct parallel of Jesus? Well, I think we've seen that there certainly are parallels, but there is also an important difference. We read that Noah was perfect in his generations, but what does it mean for a man to be described as perfect? Well, first, perhaps we should answer the question of, is he actually perfect? And if we move to Genesis 9, what happens after Noah comes off the ark? This is a section that the Sunday school stories often leave out. We read that Noah offers sacrifices to God. We have this new covenant, the rainbow, the promise, the command to be fruitful, a new creation beginning, and then almost immediately we see that everything goes horribly wrong. So in Genesis 9, we read that Noah, a man of the soil, proceeded to plant a vineyard. When he drank some of its wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered in his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father naked and told his two brothers outside. When Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of the slaves he will be to his brothers." There's some debate exactly what this means, whether the sin is just that Ham has seen his father and goes and gossips to his brothers, or there's some idea that potentially it's a euphemism. In the same way when Ari looked at Cain and Abel, we saw Adam knew his wife and they had a child. Perhaps there's some level of euphemism here, but I think regardless of that sort of debate, we can see that actually Noah's not perfect. He's a drunkard. He's cursing his sons, and his sons are a little better. So why is it that we read that he is described as perfect and blameless? Well, there's an explanation in Hebrews 11. We read that by faith, Noah, when warned about these things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world, and he became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith. And this is a picture that we see over and over. So Abraham, one of those other chosen men that I was speaking about earlier, we read that if in fact Abraham was justified by works, he had something to boast about, but not before God. What does Scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. So we see this repeated image that it's the faith that matters, it's the belief in God that matters. So it's not the works. And I think it's important to note that Noah was described as perfect before he did the works, right? Like building the ark was the works, and yet before that he's described as perfect. And so it's the fact that he listened to God, that he had faith in God, that's what made him perfect in this description. And so I think if we're talking about Noah being saved by faith, well, perhaps we should look at what was his faith in. Well, originally, of course, it was in God. He believed God's message, God's warning to build the ark. But then I think he'd have to have placed his faith in the ark itself. He had to enter into the ark once the rain started coming. And so I think actually we also see not only is Noah a picture of Jesus, but the ark itself is also a picture of Jesus. And so you see that salvation is binary through this. You're either inside the ark or you're not. So everyone's splashing and swimming and striving outside the ark. It doesn't matter how much they try; they're going to be doomed to drown. Whereas once you're inside the ark, that's it. You're safe. So salvation is binary, and it's also the only path to salvation. There's no other way for these people to be saved apart from being upon the ark. I read a commentator as well that had this nice image about the ark, that when God looks down upon it, and we know that God's omniscient, omnipresent, he sees everything, but imagine you're sort of an eye in the sky, you're looking down on the ark, all you see is the ark, you don't see the flawed humans inside. Instead, you just see this big wooden box. And in the same way, when we're saved through Jesus, God doesn't see our flaws and our sins. All he sees is his Son when he looks down upon us. And so I think if we're saying that the ark is a picture of Jesus, perhaps it makes sense to explore what actually is the ark. I guess it's a bit of an uncommon word today. We don't really use the word ark very often. Perhaps the only other place we do use it is in the Ark of the Covenant, which comes from the Hebrew word aron, which just means box or chest. It's quite an ornate box, but I guess a box nonetheless. Interesting though, this isn't actually the same word that's used for Noah's Ark. It's a similar word, but it's different. The only other place that the word for Noah Ark is used is the basket that Moses has placed in the reeds. So that basket is the same Hebrew word. It's an ark. And this comes from a different word, which again means box or chest, but it can also mean coffin. So that's kind of an interesting image here. I think that we're seeing again this idea of death and destruction being chaos, but being used as a way of salvation. For Moses as a way of escaping that being killed by being adopted. So yeah, I think it's that's an interesting imagery that we're seeing that here. And we're also seeing that this is an ark of Noah, right? It's Noah's ark. And so what does Noah mean? Well, in Genesis 5, we read that Lamech, that's Noah's father, named him, saying that this one will comfort us in our work and in the toil of our hands, caused by the ground which Yahweh has cursed. So what are we seeing here? Well, Noah actually is translated as comfort or as rest. I guess comfort from our work, is resting from our work as well. So really, if we're looking at what does Noah's Ark mean, you could say that it's actually a coffin of rest. I think that's kind of an interesting image, right? That it's this, it's associated with this death and destruction, but somehow it's bringing rest as well. And I think perhaps this is, at least to me, what this sort of seasoning of Noah, when we sprinkle it onto the gospel, what does it evoke most? And I think it's this idea of rest. I think it shows that we have to be willing to enter into these chaotic waters. We have to make this statement of faith that actually Jesus's way is better, and so I'm going to die to my old self. I'm going to enter this death and the chaotic waters, because I believe that this new way of life is better. We're seeing that the salvation is binary. You're in the ark or you're not, and we're dying to our old ways. But I think also we're being shown that once we're inside the ark, we must be willing to rest as well. And I think resting is actually a statement of faith. We talked earlier about how Noah was saved through faith. I think being willing to rest is itself a statement of faith, because I mean, if you imagine like a sort of an ancient Israelite farmer, for them to rest from their work, they're basically saying, I have enough, it's okay, I can take this rest because I trust God's promise for the Sabbath, that I can take this time off. And so I really do think that actually rest itself is a statement of faith. And so I think that's why it's tied up in this imagery here, that in order to enter the ark, that's what it brings us rest, but we must be willing to accept that rest. I think potentially there's something of a contradiction here, that earlier I said that we must be careful not to waste our lives, that we've got individual responsibility that matters, that we need to partner with God. I don't think it's a mistake that the Bible's linked these two things together here. I mean, I don't think anything in the Bible is a mistake, but particularly I think this is done deliberately to sort of show this tension between the works that we're trying to do, but also to take rest from those works. And I think the way that I sort of resolve that that tension in my own mind is to say that to rest is not the same as to be lazy. And I guess perhaps I can give an example of this in this afternoon when I finished work and was thinking about preparing this talk. Ordinarily I think I would have gone through my slides trying to work out, oh, what am I going to say? Let's make sure I've got everything set up perfectly. But I think actually what would that really have benefited? I think really that wasn't something for God. Really, it was for me, right? It was to make me feel more confident, me to feel happier. And so actually, instead, I went for a walk. I enjoyed the sunshine, and my mind could wander. And I think God spoke to me more in that than if I was, trying to learn what I was going to say for each slide. And so I think, we're called to rest once we're saved because we know that it's enough. God's already done enough. We're already fully saved. And that actually, by doing so, we're going to meet with God more. We're going to see what God's doing more. And that's a time that's like how we partner with God, right? We talked about Noah partnering with God. We have to be willing to rest in order to see where God is moving. And I think that can be quite a challenge for us in today's busy life where we're told to strive and to work. I think there really is this parallel between these two stories. I think we've seen it in the story itself, but also we've seen if you've been in Sanctuary for a while, you might have seen this slide before, but it's this is the genealogy in Genesis 5. So it's talking from Adam through to Noah, the different names of the people. So we know that Noah means rest, Adam means man. And I think there's a message in this genealogy. We see that Adam means man, Seth appointed, Enosh mortal, and so on. And so we have this message that man was appointed mortal sorrow, yet God's glory descends from above, teaching us that his death shall bring the humbled rest. And again, I think this is just another great hyperlink between these two stories. And I think when the Bible says something twice, it means it really matters, right? And so we've already seen these parallels between Noah's life and Jesus's life just in the structure of the stories. But actually, before his story even begins, God already has all this planned out in all the generations, right back to Adam, right? We see what's that God had a plan, and this equally applies to Noah's life and to Jesus's life. So for Noah, we see a man appointed mortal sorrow. Well, Adam and Eve are cursed to die and thrown out of the garden. The world is broken and sinful. God's glory descends from above. We see God coming down, speaking to Noah. And what does God say? Well, he teaches that death will bring to the destruction of the earth, will bring the humbled rest. Well, who's the humbled? It's Noah, right? He's humble and faithful to God to accept the warning. So we see this applying to Noah's story, but equally it can apply to Jesus' story. That man was appointed mortal sorrow, again, being the idea that we're in a broken world, we're all doomed to die. But God's glory descends from above. Literally, the Son of God descends from heaven to earth. And what does Jesus do while he's on earth? Well, he teaches us, and it's his death, Jesus's death, that brings the faithful rest. And we've seen the parallel between salvation and that bringing rest. And I think it's interesting as well that it's the word teaching here, because it's not that Jesus somehow forces us to be saved or forces us to have rest. No, he teaches us that, and we have to accept that. We have to listen to that and take that on board in order to receive that. So I think finally, I just want to wrap up with a phrase, a passage from Hebrews, which I think speaks to this idea of rest again. So we read in Hebrews 4, therefore, since the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us be careful that none of you will be found to have fallen short of it. So I think we're getting a warning here, right? That actually it's possible, to be saved. There's this promise of salvation, but it's possible to fall short of that rest. But we also have heard the good news proclaimed to us, just as they did. but the message they heard was of no value to them because they did not share in the faith of those who obeyed. There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did from his. So we're seeing here that to enter into his rest, the evidence is of that is that you rest yourself, because again, it is that statement of faith. It's the idea that God has done enough, God is enough, and so therefore I don't need to do everything in my own strength. I can rely and trust in God. So it then goes on, let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one will perish by following their example of disobedience. So I think again we're actually seeing there a bit of a warning that to not rest is an example of disobedience, and I don't think that's necessarily a condemnation. I don't think the idea is, oh, you're not resting, therefore you're not saved. I think that's too strong a statement. But I do think it's a warning to us, right? That actually, if we look at our lives and we can see areas where we're not resting, perhaps it's in the area of finance. You're striving, always trying to work. Or perhaps that's because you don't trust God enough in that area. Perhaps you don't fully believe God's promises around His provision. Or perhaps around the area of tithing, and God asks us to test Him in that. Perhaps it's in relationships, and you're striving to make connections yourself and meet people yourself and putting pressure on yourself, and actually is that a sign that perhaps that's an area of your life where you're not trusting God enough, that you haven't accepted His promises in the Bible around that area. I think it's both an encouragement, it's a permission to rest, that actually we're allowed to do that because we've been saved, but also a warning, I guess, as well, that it's something that we should be looking for in our own lives as a warning sign. We're going to move into a time of discussion. I guess there's a couple of things we could look at. I think perhaps I've laid out these parallels between both Noah and Jesus, and also the ark and Jesus, and I've sort of focused on this idea of rest. But perhaps there's other things that have stood out to you, that have spoken to you. So it'd be great to share anything that has stood out to you about that. And also, I guess the second question is related to that idea of rest. Are there areas in your life where you think you aren't resting, and if so, is that something where you need to press into God's promises for your life more?